Hey, welcome into the second lesson of the course where we're going to discover how you can find attacking moves in your real games. And the beauty of this lesson is that attacking moves are the strongest, and therefore if you know how to find them, you in general are able to find the strongest moves in chess. Let's start with a very interesting game which started from e4, knight to f6, and here is, even though it's of course a very basic position, but anyway, there is the first thing that I would like to highlight here. Here white played e5, and you may just notice that you usually can attack only if you move your pawns or pieces to opponent's half of the board. In the vast majority of the cases, all or almost all of the opponent's forces are situated on his half of the board, and therefore, in order to make an attacking move, you need to advance your pawn or piece there. And that's the first very useful thing to remember. Let's move on. Black played knight to d5, and here white continued chasing the knight. He played c4, attacking the knight, and then pawn to c5. And an interesting moment here, which I would like to highlight as well, is that when you are looking for attacking moves, you need to shift your focus to your opponent. And that's quite an unusual thing to do, I would say, because normally when you play chess, you think about your pieces and where you want to move them. That's like the standard, the usual way of thinking. But it's not the best one, because the attacking style of thinking suggests the opposite. You need to, instead of thinking about your army, you need to look at the opponent's half of the board and think how you can attack something there. And as you focus your attention in that direction, you also narrow down your choices dramatically, because in this position, for instance, I mean, even theoretically, there are only two moves that you can play on opponent's half of the board, which are c5 and e6. And e6 does not make any sense. You're just losing the pawn for no reason, and therefore you see that there is only one attacking move possible, and this is what white did. He played pawn to c5. Black replied knight to d5, and white continued doing the same thing, changing the knight, creating attacking moves. Black protected the knight, and white attacked it once again. If I may bring up this analogy just to illustrate this way of thinking, just to make an analogy with the real life situation. Imagine you want to give a compliment to someone. It's not that you're gonna just stand and think like, what am I going to say? No, you need to shift your focus from yourself to the other person, to the person you talk to, and notice something good in that person that you are going to bring up by making your compliment. And it's kind of similar process goes here. Instead of thinking about your plans and intentions, you need to focus your attention on opponent, on his half of the board, and think what kind of things you can do there to make some damage. Black captured the knight, and then he grabbed the pawn. At this point, once again, white asked himself the same question. How can I move forward? How can I attack something in the opponent's position? Can you find the attacking move for white here? I'll give you a couple seconds to think about it. Once again, the person who is not familiar with attacking way of thinking would probably play something like knight to f3, developing a piece, which is not bad, but not the strongest option, because if you can attack, it's usually the best thing to do. And that's why white played queen g4, which moves the white's piece forward and attacks that pawn on g7. Notice that castling does not really help, because white can play bishop h6, making use of the pin on the g-file, and therefore black would have to move the g-pawn forward and give up the exchange, that rook and f8. So that's not a good option for black, and therefore that's not what he did. At this point he played bishop f8. Here's the question for you once again. How would you attack here as white? And once again, the amount of choices you have here is really very limited. I think it's pretty much the only move you can play, which is bishop g5, which attacks something, in this case the queen. Black played pawn to f6. And right now there is another moment that I would like to specify. When you play chess, at some point there will be a position where there will be multiple choices you need to calculate, and that's the moment where a lot of players struggle, because they know that they need to calculate lots of different possibilities, evaluate them, visualize all these things in your head, and it all sounds very complicated. But the right thing to go about it is to focus your attention on the force and moves, which are checks, captures, and attacking moves. These moves force a certain specific reply from your opponent, and therefore instead of calculating any possible reply, you will only calculate the one possible reply. For example, in this case, when black plays f6, you need to, again, of course, look at the black's half of the board and ask yourself, alright, what are the moves I can play there? But even more so, you need to focus on forcing moves, which are checks, for example, queen h5, and captures, for example, pawn takes f6 or maybe bishop takes f6. And these are the three moves that I would recommend you check very quickly, first of all, before anything else. And only if you notice that neither of these options is good, then you will go with some other option. In this case, white took the pawn on f6, then he played queen h5 check, which forces black's king to move, which is a good thing for you. It brings the queen forward, so it's easier for you to attack. And right now, can you find the winning continuation for white? Once again, I'll give you a couple seconds to think about it. Of course, you're welcome to apply the same way of thinking, looking at the opponent's half of the board, thinking what are the attacking moves you can play there, and in particular the forcing moves, checks, captures, attacking moves. In this case, it is both the check and capture. It's bishop takes f6. And it's not really a sacrifice because on the next move, white plays queen h4, and white grabs that big, bold queen on d8, winning the game, and black resign. It's been a short game and a great illustration of the way to attack. And I hope that you remember these few key ideas, how you need to shift your attention to opponent's half of the board, think how you can attack something there, and pay close attention to the forcing moves. Now let's move on to the other examples, maybe a bit more complicated, and let's see how it works there. Here's the next example. It is white to play here, and I think it's in a theoretical position, but nevertheless, let me ask you the same question. What are the things that you think about here? What are the moves that you would consider here? The one thing that white noticed here is that the black's pieces on the queen side are somewhat clumsy, and they're almost locked there, and therefore white came to the idea that he may possibly try to capture one of the black's pieces. He also realized that in case white plays b4 right away, trying to attack the black's queen in the most straightforward way, the queen can escape to the a4 square, and there is no direct way for white to continue chasing black's pieces. Therefore, instead of this, in the game, white plays bishop e2. He kind of prepared an execution of the same idea on the next move, and in the game it actually went out really well for him. Black castled, and white continued with his plan. He played pawn to b4, now queen goes to a4, but in this case there is a difference. This move bishop e2 that white played previously enabled white to play bishop d1, and whoops, the queen is captured, black resigns. Is it just everything went so great for white, and does that mean that white was correct with his choice of moves? Well, not exactly. Let's take a look at the previous position before black hustled. The only problem with the move bishop e2 is that it leaves black with the freedom of choice, and black can do whatever he wants. For example, he could have captured that pawn on c4, providing more free space for his queenside pieces, and this whole idea capturing them would fail for white. Of course, the position still looks fairly good for white, but anyway, he wouldn't be able to win the game immediately. Instead of bishop e2, was there any better way for white to execute his threat and to convert his advantage into something tangible? Yes, there was. White should have played a forcing move instead. You know, the move which is check, capture, or attacking move. In this case, there are no checks. As for captures, white could possibly take on d5, but it doesn't really do much. It's just an exchange of pawns. And as for the attacking moves, we already noticed that the move b4 doesn't do anything right away, but white also had the move bishop to c3, attacking the queen. The only move for the queen to escape is queen to c5, and now white can attack the queen once again with pawn to b4, and all of a sudden the queen is captured right in the middle of the board. That was the best way for white to win the game, and you can just notice the power of the forcing moves. When you play a forcing move such as bishop c3, you leave no choice for your opponent, but only to play the move which is forced, in this case bishop c5. And that's the great power of this kind of move. like bishop c3. That's why I always say that whenever you need to calculate variations, pay attention to the forcing moves, checks, captures, and attacking moves. Here's the next example, the game between Topalov and Garry Kasparov playing black. We start from move number 10, and as always, throughout this entire course, quite often I'm not showing you the entire game, but only a certain fragment. If you wish to check out the entire game shown in the video, you can go to the supplementary materials and find their games in BGN format, where you can see the complete games. Anyway, let's go ahead with the current example. It is white to play. What do you think about this? How would you play here? I believe that for a lot of players this would be an extremely tough choice. They would start thinking about various different opportunities that white has here, but when you know the right way of thinking, things became way easier. If you ask yourself, what is the move that I can play on opponent's half of the board that would attack something? You see that f5 comes to your mind right away. That's the way for you to pressurize that pawn on e6, and it also helps you possibly to open up more lines and diagonals for your pieces. Black replied pawn to e5, and here's another moment which I think is a great differentiator between the strong players and the rest. Strong players always look for ways to attack. Even when they are under attack themselves, they still look for ways to counterattack. If you look at the games from the super tournaments, you will see counter blows, counter attacks all the time. While in the games of beginner and intermediate level players, you rarely see counter blows. So what I mean here is that you should always look for attacking moves even when you are under an attack. Like in this example, yes, black attacked your move on d4, but it does not mean that you should think about this knight and where it should go. Instead, think about your way to attack, and this is exactly what Topalov did by playing queen h5, creating a very straightforward checkmate threat, queen takes f7. Of course, Garry Kasparov is not the one who would miss a scholar checkmate, sort of. He played queen to e7. Here Topalov did another interesting thing. He didn't want to move his knight back, which is again a good strategy. You generally speaking don't want to move your pieces back, and that's why he found a quite tricky way to keep the position, keep the momentum, and keep moving forward. He played first queen to f3, attacking that knight on e4. And notice that black can't really take the knight, because in this case white would continue rook to e1, and because of that pin, white would take back the knight on the next move, continuing a very powerful attack along the e-file. That's why in the game Kasparov simply retreated. He played knight to c5. And here is the trick from Topalov. He played knight c6, a move forward that might come as a shocker, but again, if you always look for ways to move forward, you also have the chance to find a move like this. And the idea behind these tactics is not that complex actually. It's just that if black captures the knight, white recaptures with a double attack to the black's king and the rook. Therefore, white would win the rook on the next move and gain the material advantage. That's why Kasparov did not go for that line. He instead moved his queen away from the attack. He played queen to c7. And here another kind of brilliant move from Topalov. He played bishop d5. It's basically the same idea. In case the knight is captured, white recaptures with the bishop with a double attack to black's king and rook. Quite the similar idea to what we have just seen on the previous move, but anyway, the whole idea of keeping that knight there on c6 right in the middle of the black's army is somewhat very interesting. Kasparov was probably angry about Topalov playing not very respectfully, and he decided to trap this knight anyway. That's why he played a5, and the reason is to not let this knight escape via the b4 square. So he played a5, white played bishop g5, another cool move, because it also plays your piece on opponent's half of the board. In this case, it does not attack something right away, even though it does create some threats. As we discussed in the beginning of this course, you need to increase activity of your pieces, move them forward where they control a lot of squares, and which in turn maximizes your chances for attack in the future. Such as in the given position, having that bishop on g5 in a very active position and having these pieces on the center of the board, currently white is threatening maybe something like bishop d8, even going after the queen, or maybe knight d8. which actually happens in the game. Kasparov played rook a6, trying to win this knight, but the knight is not gonna, go away. It goes inside. It goes knight d8, currently attacking the pawn on f7. Very unusual way. I mean, rarely we can see the situation where the f7 square of black is attacked by the white's knight from d8. Black played f6, seems like the only way to save this pawn, and white continued, knight f7. This knight just became extremely active in this game. It should get some extra payment from the employer. Black played rook g8. Finally, white has to go back because the bishop is under the attack, so he played bishop e3. Black played g6, and the knight continues his active work and the devastation of the black's territory. He played knight g5. This time, white enables the discovered attack to the black's rook. Black goes rook g7, and here white captures the pawn on g6. Once again, notice forcing moves. In this case, it is a capture. Also notice that white tries to counterattack as much as he possibly can. Instead of just thinking how to save this knight and where to move the knight, which is currently attacked, white thinks how to counterattack. That's how he plays pawn takes g6. And here, as you may notice, in case black tries to capture that knight, that's really not a good idea because white can grab that bishop on f8 with the support of the rook from f1, and it just destroys black's position right away. So here white will probably win within a few moves. Kasparov didn't do this. He played rook takes g6. And currently there is one last forcing move that white can play here to fix his material advantage. Can you find the move? Again, ask yourself, how can you play on opponent's half of the board, hopefully with check, capture, or attacking move? He played bishop f7, attacking the king and the rook there on g6. Therefore, black has to give up some material. In the game, Kasparov decided to give up the queen for two white's minor pieces, but certainly that gives white the material advantage, and here it's already the winning position for white. Certainly, he first took away that knight from c5 because it also opens up the d file for his rook, so he played there. Kasparov played bishop to e7. Topalov continued playing attacking moves. Once again, how would you play here as white? Well, as you know, we need to move forward, hopefully with some sort of attack. Therefore, the moves that you may need to think about are queen to d5 check. That's one move to consider. Another move to consider is rook to d5, which is what Topalov did. And actually, it is a threat, even though it does not look like a threat, but it is, because white is threatening rook takes e5, taking advantage of the pin. Kasparov played bishop g4, white played queen e4, black replied with king to g7, and here there was a move that Topalov missed to find, which would probably win the game right away, and yeah, that's just quite a little bit of an unusual move. Anyway, if you look at opponent's half of the board and think about the attacking moves you can play there, you definitely need to consider moves such as rook takes e5 or rook takes c5, or the other one, which actually could work, which is rook to d8. It is not actually a sacrifice because in case black captures the rook, white can take it back right away. And the good thing about this rook is that it helps white to penetrate into black's position, and therefore on the next move the rook can either go to b8, capture that pawn on b7, or maybe to e8, attack the bishop, and in addition to the white's material advantage, white would even start the very straightforward attack of the black's pawns and pieces and the king ultimately. And in case black captures the rook, which seems like the most obvious thing to do, white has the move queen takes b7, grabbing the pawn with a check, and on the next move white would also collect that additional material rook on a6. This was the way for white to completely destroy black's position, to win this b7 pawn along the way, and Kasparov would probably resign right away. Great game by Topalov with a couple of very instructive moments. Notice how he always tried to move forward, how he always tried to play forcing moves, and how he tried to counterattack whenever possible. That's the way for you to go about finding attacking moves.